welcome to this latest episode of Beyond the Royal Headlines. We've got a podcast now called From Below the Balcony, and I keep mixing up the two names. I don't know why I chose two names that are so similar to each other, but there you go. And if you've seen this before, it's been a little bit of me sort of monologuing about various different issues. I said at the last one that we're going to change the format a little bit and start inviting some guests. And I'm really pleased that we've got Laura Clancy, Dr. Laura Clancy, from the Lancaster University, which is very exciting. Laura, your first book was Running the Family Firm: How the Royal Family Manages Its Money and its image and our money, which came out in 2021. And of course, you just literally last week or late at the end of April brought out What is the Monarchy For, which is a very good question. And we'll come on to the answer a little bit later. And if you're watching this, you can go to the Republic online store and get a copy. It's now available. Obviously, you can also pick it up in other bookshops and so on, but why do that when you can get it from us? Yeah, it's really interesting read, so I definitely recommend getting that. So I'm going to chat to Laura for a little bit, ask a few questions, run through some of the issues that come up in those, particularly in that book, and then around halfway through we'll stop and start taking questions. So you can use the Q&A feature on Zoom to chip in with any questions, and we'll take those in about 30 minutes or so. And just a reminder, of course, that this webinar, this program, is produced by Republic, so check us out at republic.org.uk. If you're not already a member, please do join, and that's now from just £4 a month, or you can donate if you are a member, and obviously check us out on YouTube, where this will be, it's being recorded, so it will turn up on YouTube along with a bunch of other videos, and on social media. And of course, we've got Republic Day. This is being recorded on the whatever the day is today, the 6th, and on Saturday the 10th of May is Republic Day. If you're in London, it's Trafalgar Square from midday to 3 o'clock. If you're in Cardiff, it's outside Cardiff Castle from 2 p.m. and Calton Hill in Edinburgh from 2 p.m. as well. And there's stuff that you can get involved with online as well if you want to. And on June 14th, we also have Troop in the Colour protest down at the Mall, where we will literally be below the balcony, almost said cheering them, but booing really, at the Royals and protesting Troop in the Colour. So, Laura, hello, welcome.
Hi.
Welcome to this edition of Beyond the Royal Headlines. It's really good.
Thank you for having me. It's really nice to be here.
And really, really interesting reading your book. Loads of interesting stuff in there. And I was looking at your page on the university website as well, because I mean, the monarchy is kind of central to, is quite a central focus of your work, where you talk about looking at the cultural politics of the British monarchy and the aristocracy. Is that, I mean, what does the cultural politics mean? What's that? What is it that interests you there?
Yeah, so I guess so I'm a lecturer in media. So I'm interested in media and how that works. And really, I kind of stumbled towards this really thinking about ideas of class. That's really what kind of started to interest me. So I'm myself from quite a working class background as a first generation student, and those seeing, representations in the media of really very, very rich people kind of caught my eye, and our kind of fascination with that. Downton Abbey, Selling Sunset, all of those kind of shows, I think are really like the kind of the resonance that has with us for some unknown reason. And I also can't stop watching things like that. So what is that? Those are the kinds of questions I was interested in. And then I ended up at the kind of the royal family, and that kind of spiraled into this whole project around their economics and all of that. So those are the questions I kind of started with, I suppose. And that's what I mean by cultural politics, I suppose. So both I think about kind of their economic and their political factors, but also their cultural factors, particularly the role of the media I suppose, in representing them, reproducing their power, often being quite complicit in reproducing the monarchical system as it is.
Yeah, and it was interesting. I think this is in relation to your first book, which is sort of looking at a lot of the costs and the sort of the economics of it. You called them the gold standard corporation. I mean, what in what way are they? I think you're contrasting with this popular image of them being antiquated and archaic, but
Yeah.
in fact they're quite. The notion of them being called the firm is quite apt in what you were saying.
Yeah, and I mean that goes back to what I was saying about class, because of course we know like they're posh and we know they're upper class, but that they're like in a different bracket to like these kind of, corporate, there's all this talk about corporate billionaires buying up London and stuff, and we often think about the royals as like separate to that. And those questions around class I thought were really interesting. And I just kind of started thinking, well, actually, what if we just start thinking about the royals as just another corporation? And the more you kind of tug at that thread, I think the more you realize that that's quite a useful analogy because of their funding, because of their connections, because of the fact, they're interested in sustaining themselves and maintaining themselves just like any other corporation. And when you start to look at them like that, I think it slightly twists the way you think about them and you think about their role in society, because I think lots of people are willing to be critical of big, Amazon, Apple, whatever it is, unless people are willing to be critical of the monarchies we know. Um, so when you start bringing those two things together, I felt like that was quite an interesting.
Yeah, I mean that sort of resonates with me a bit. I think in the sense that people talk about the magic of the monarchy, which
Yes.
someone contained. It's a perfectly intelligent person that I've discussed this issue with before, but when they're in front of a camera trying to defend the monarchy, they just wanted to keep leaning on this idea of magic. And I try and do what I call sort of secularize it by taking away the silly sort of titles and things and just say, well, what actually is it? It's a bunch of people just spending our money and living the high life, and it's about grubby power, and it's about grubby financial deals and all the rest of it. So it's a similar sort of take, I guess. I mean, what would be you've covered quite a lot of ground in this latest, but what's your kind of principal criticism or concern about the British monarchy, and what is the kind of the key thing about it that concerns you?
So, well, I've kind of said that my I'm interested in class and inequality. So to me, it would always be that. But I mean, you can also bring in questions of like I did in the book, like, and you can make connections with that to gender, to race, those kind of broader issues around, I think, identity and inequality, I think. And of course, that also seeps into democracy. And that's something I thought more about in this book, I think, than I did in the first book. I mean, it's worth saying that the first book is quite academic, like it was my PhD,
Yeah,
and it's kind of there's a lot of theory in there, and it's quite heavy, and it's probably not. I wrote it as accessibly as I could, but it's probably not for everyone. And I think this book kind of teases out more some of those connections. I think in a slightly I don't want to say easy way, but in a slightly more clear way, I think, than maybe that original work did. But my concerns are the same, I think, around these kind of
yeah,
patterns of inequality. And also to me, like what else the monarchy kind of holds up. And I feel like, people always talk about British people being obsessed with class. And there's a reason, I think, it's because we're so obsessed with this class system that's based on the monarchy. And then we have that then knocks on to the fact we have so many Eton graduates in Parliament and so on. It's like there's a knock-on effect, I think, that I think you can, when you pay
yeah.
attention, I think is quite obvious.
Yeah, and you see, you look more at democracy in this book, and you've quoted. I was going to say a couple of my favourite people, but not least favourite, but a couple of people who are oddly monarchist, and that's Philip Blond and Vernon Bogdanor, and they're sort of repeating these notions that it is democratic, and certainly it doesn't stand against democracy, and that this notion that it saves us from extremism. I mean, do you think there's any validity in these sorts of arguments that somehow sits comfortably with our democratic values?
I don't see how it possibly can. Like when I read that, I was quite surprised by that actually. Like I don't know how you can look at the system and think that's anything close to democracy. Because to me, the very the very foundations of democracy is around the people's choice essentially. I know that's very basic, but and how we get to where we are, and we have no say in that, of course, and it's not representative, and it doesn't. Well, I was going to say it doesn't claim to be, but actually it does claim to be, doesn't it? But it certainly isn't that. So no, I don't think so. And I think a few things recently. So I think the all the stuff around Boris Johnson and Brexit brought that to light, I think, in a really interesting way. In a way that maybe made it more obvious to people briefly.
Yeah. You
Um,
sort of you kind of unpick this whole thing, the Walter Badgeau quote, which I know you
mm,
said is often misquoted, so I'll probably misquote it now, but it's about the monarch's right to advise and warn, and I keep forgetting the other one. Um, but um, but you sort of unpack that a little bit and say, well, which way round is it going? Because some people will say, well, it's always the prime minister's advising the monarch, but it can go the other way.
mm.
It's a little bit unclear as to what that actually means and how it works.
Yeah, and you mentioned that it was misquoted, and I think I also can't remember. I'm sorry which way around it is, but the misquotation is really problematic because it actually means something completely different.
Yeah.
That's more the way the way it's been misquoted is much more active,
Mm,
as though they're not just there to um advise, as in be kind of an overseer. It's much more, it feels like they're much more active in making decisions, which of course they're not. So that misquotation is part of the problem. And this muddy ground around everything around the monarchy, as you've always said very eloquently, that's a huge problem. Because so many people don't know the real answer, if there even is a real answer to so many of these questions.
indeed, and I suppose I mean you said that it does raise a democratic question with the secrecy of the meetings that they have, the weekly audiences, which have always argued, it's kind of said that they are secret as if that's perfectly normal,
Yeah.
but it's the only meetings in the state that are completely secret.
Yeah, it's bizarre, really, isn't it? And they're so romanticized. Like it's been represented so many times in media. Those audiences. There was a play about it. It's in The Crown.
Mm,
In The Crown, they really romanticize it as this like personal relationship, particularly like, between Thatcher and the Queen. You know, they're both women. They talk about their kids. Whereas, yeah, exactly. When you think about it, these are really high stake, very high up in the British establishment meetings that are
mm.
just completely unaccounted for. Yeah.
With no one else in the room, no
Yeah.
minutes, no record, nothing.
Yeah. Crazy. Yeah.
And so much could go on in that meeting.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, you touch on you mentioned Brexit and so on, but you touch on the prorogation as well, which sort of
Mm.
raised a whole bunch of questions. There's this notion that I sort of wrote about a little bit in my book, but you put it quite nicely where you say that uh, rather than prompting debates about monarchy's usefulness to a contemporary democracy, the Queen instead became another victim of Johnson's moral bankruptcy, which put her on side of the people and therefore blameless, which is quite an odd situation to put the monarch in. I mean, she's head of state, she's got a job, didn't do it,
Yeah.
but she gets pitched as the another victim.
Well, I wonder if that would work for Charles, or was that a symptom of the way she was portrayed, particularly towards the end of her life?
Mm,
Um, well, we know the kind of elderly grandmother that we need to protect, and I wonder if that was particularly against Boris Johnson, who's someone who's quite openly misogynist, whether that was part of the deal as well. Like we tricked, the
yeah,
poor old Queen, and I don't know whether that will play. I don't. Maybe it would with Charles. I don't know. There's different narratives we're going for with Charles now, aren't there? But I think that certainly played a role.
and I mean, do you think that the Queen's gender and age sort of made a difference, or was it simply that she had been on the throne for so long, going back to a time of more deference? I mean, do you think it is?
Both, all of those, I think probably. I think what is interesting, and you have said this as well, is that it was just the status quo
Mm,
with her. And then the disruption of that, as you've seen through the growth of all your protests and stuff, has been really powerful. And I think that was, yeah, again, part of the same problem that they couldn't conceptualize the Queen as problematic in that same way. Whereas I think people can a little bit more with Charles. We're not quite there, but it's definitely
yeah,
more, I would say.
yeah. And because another area which you write on is this soft power and its connection with sort of national identity. I mean, um, I'm very skeptical about the idea of soft power, and there is an academic that said that it's usually backed up by hard power, but which and the claims that our soft power somehow saved us from the worst of Trump have been proven to be completely follow because we've been hit by tariffs, and there's an article today saying the analysis shows we're worse hit than the EU by those tariffs. But I mean, the national identity and people's connection, how solid do you think that is? Because I know you sort of get into some of the data and some of the polling. I mean, do you think it's waning? Do you think it's as fixed as the BBC might like us to believe?
No, I don't. I think it's shifting really quickly. I think it does still hold. I mean, you still do see shaming of Republican sentiment, I think, and I think that's very much kind of couched in ideas of national identity, that you're kind of not, if you're anti-monarchy, you're anti-British. And I think that's where that kind of thing really comes through. And I agree with you what you were saying before about the Queen. That was all attached to that kind of weird obsession we have in this country around World War II. And she was all part of that, and that was all bunged up together, and that's also shifted. I do still think it's there. I think Harry and Meghan really fractured it quite considerably, I think, because they demonstrated, ideas of institutional racism, for example. Charles doesn't resonate as his mother did, as we know. And I think Andrew has done a hell of a lot of damage to that as well, because people don't want to be associated with that. I do still think it's powerful, and I do think soft power, I studied the media, so I think soft power is really important. But I think it's the most movable thing, I think, probably. And you can see that recently.
And of course, I suppose our soft power comes from so many places, and culture and media and language are all key to that. I mean, it's noted. I was asked to write an article, which I think is probably out now in the National, about the relationship between the royals and the BE Day celebration. Because I mean, it prompted me to look yesterday at the BBC coverage, and it was the top story. But the top story said almost nothing about the veterans, about the sacrifice of the people that are alive at the time. It was the royals have tea with with the veterans, but it was all about which royals were there and the fact that the kids were there and all the rest of it. So it was very I think you had to get down to the 8th paragraph before they mentioned a veteran, before the fact that the veteran was talking to George. So which strikes me as pretty appalling. And of course we raised the question about their association with the military, because they do dress up in uniforms and medals they haven't earned, which I find distasteful. And I think that there are levers there which we can sort of use as leverage to kind of ease them away from that national that connection with our identity. And I suppose as we get further away from the war, maybe that will also help. I don't know, but yeah, I find the soft power thing is curious. But the one thing I've often said about the royals is that they are sort of tax-funded Kardashians, which is one to get into, because I think you mentioned that the people aren't that bothered about the monarchy, but they still have this sort of interest in the celebrity royal.
Yeah,
I mean, and I guess if the media is your thing, I mean, this must be an area that you've thought about, and to what extent does that celebrity appeal work for them, or does it work against them as well?
I think both. Yeah, I think Kate Gate showed how it works against them, because social media is, they've always had such. I find their control and their power over the media representation really interesting. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff about the Queen's coronation and how every single second, they had the cameramen who were sat in particular boxes so they couldn't be seen, and it was so heavily staged. And of course, all royal events are still staged, but you couldn't possibly stage it to that extent now, because someone will just stick a camera phone up and get something else. So that process, I think, and what the effect of that on our feelings towards them, I think, is really interesting. And social media, I think that's another, if we want to talk about how how you fracture the system, that's another one, I think, because you're not just seeing this very kind of BBC tightly controlled narrative, you're seeing something else. You saw that with Harry and Meghan, you saw that with Kate Gate, you see that with lots of different things.
Well, you still see the attempt at the tightly controlled.
Oh yeah,
it's the BBC, and I think you comment on this. I wasn't watching the TV at the time because I was in a police cell, but I think you commented on the fact that the protest, which I believe you were at, didn't get the coverage, but then the arrest did. But there was a program they did at the end of that year, came out on Boxing Day of 2023, which is kind of the year of the coronation. didn't mention any critical stories whatsoever. And then they showed them coming out of Buckingham Palace, and then they just skipped them going into the cathedral and completely skipped the whole route because they knew they wouldn't have been able to cut out the yellow flags and banners and so on. So yeah, but there's no mention of any of the scandals, any of the opinion poll numbers and losing support and so on. So it was pretty appalling. But what they can't do, as you say, is control the social media and all the new media and the other routes that people can go through to get their news and get their coverage. So I think that's fundamentally changed from 1953. So
Yeah, totally. And when you're there and when you see it, like to reflect on, like it was so massive. Like the yellow went as far as you could see down a street in London. How the fact that they edit that out, like to experience that, I thought
yeah,
was really quite incredible. The blatant bias.
yeah.
And we know that right from other things, but yeah, it is really
And
quite.
we still see it with, we protested at 3 Commonwealth protests, and they've got the camera on the other side outside Westminster Cathedral, and they very carefully pan it around us so they don't catch us in the shot as much as possible.
Mm.
Now, they can't avoid us completely because they've got a camera inside the door showing them walk in, and you can see a very clear line of yellow at the behind them. But this is why we use a lot of noise as well to try and make sure they can't cut that out. But they do try and make sure that we're not part of it, which is fairly appalling. But there's an interesting line in your book here. Monarchy's use of celebrity culture must be careful and strategic. If we had started hearing about the Queen, how the Queen hated particular prime ministers, or how tedious she found waving on the Buckingham Palace balcony, her revered status would have been fractured. So, I mean, for you, they're quite consciously tapping into that celebrity status, but they're being very careful in how they do that. It's a slippery slope, I guess.
Yeah, and in my first book, I write quite a lot about the Instagram accounts, which I find fascinating, particularly the ones for Kate and William. The way that they're, these kind of very early on, they've maybe changed a bit recently, I think, actually, but early on, there were these kind of very intimate family photos of them in the garden with the kids or whatever. And it was this, like any other celebrity. But of course, it wasn't just them doing a selfie. It was very carefully staged and choreographed, and very carefully the outfit and everything was very carefully picked. So they were kind of staging this intimacy when actually they were just still got the barriers up. But it made people, I think, that was a way of appealing to younger generations. I think maybe portraying that kind of family life.
It's interesting though. I mean, increasingly celebrities don't put their young children in front of the cameras. I mean, it's quite common. I've seen one person that sticks out is Tom Daly, who occasionally you see the kids, but they always make sure they're facing the other way.
Yeah.
If it's a family shot and so on. And I can't think that I've ever seen a photo of Starmer's kids. I don't know how many there are or what their names are. And I know that people like Tony Blair and David Cameron had arrangements with the media that the gloves are off as far as they're concerned, but their kids are absolutely not to be discussed, photographed, whatever. But the royals go the other way. They quite deliberately use their kids as props in their celebrity pitch, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. And they have to, next generation, isn't it? They have to produce consent for that next generation as well. And the literal biological production is so important to them continuing. But I mean, I think with the big celebrities, you're seeing that more, but with more minor celebrities or influencers, the children are plastered all over and they've got, brand deals and all of this. So I think it is happening in other areas. And they're kind of doing this tightrope on the line. I think it has changed actually from that first book, which I published in 2021. I think you can see the shift where maybe they've realized that wasn't, I don't know, that was like a bit too much, or
there's been some pushback on the use of families in sort of social media accounts, and because I know there was a horrific case in the States where what was supposed to be a model family was turned out to be abusive, and so there's quite a lot of pushback on a lot of this, and I think that the questions are, of course, asked quite a lot about whether or not it's abusive to put the kids in, the royal children in the front of the cameras at such a young age. And of course, Harry's book Spare raises a lot of these concerns, but it all seems to have been water off ducks back to them.
Yeah, I think so. And I think they're just too useful. Kate, again, they're not maybe don't have quite as much currency as they did, but at one point they were keeping the monarchy propped up. I think Kate and William and the kids because of people's interest with them in them. So I think the currency is to, people's reaction when they've released two birthday photos recently, haven't they, of the kids, and people's reaction. Why would you turn that kind of positive coverage down, I think?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the other thing that they try and do is obviously constantly spin this charity thing. And you talk about, you mentioned this notion of philanthrocapitalism.
Mm.
And it says on your website about the relationship between monarchy and capitalism. That relationship is as old as capitalism itself. I mean, so is it an extension of capitalism? Is it part of is there a relationship between sort of the new wealth and old money? And they've sort of adopted these. You point out that obviously a lot of rich people do charity as well. There's almost as a way of saying, well, don't worry about all the wealth. We're putting something back.
Yeah. Yeah. And the monarchy have obviously been doing that for a lot longer. Well, Frank Petraska says it's since kind of the Victorian age when they've started that. And that's a model I think lots of elites have maybe followed. I mean, I think you can see in various spaces how they mold to different eras. Social media being one, a brand can't not be on social media now. Philanthropy, you can see hundreds of years ago they were all over the slave trade because that was what was, what the moment was. So you can see how they've adapted to different periods and
Yeah.
shifted um, in order to continue. And I think this connection between the older elites and newer elites, and what by that I'm meaning kind of these new corporate billionaires, that kind of connection is something that I'm really interested in. I want to do a project on like the Duke of Westminster and those kinds of
Right.
aristocrats, where I think there's a lot of crossovers with the monarchy, but also a lot of differences because of the institution. But how they're, his wealth in contemporary Britain is pretty astonishing.
Yeah.
And that's only possible through diversifying portfolios and so on. And you can see that through in the Duchy of Lancaster and the Duchy of
I
Cornwall
think
and all of that.
there's obviously a whole sort of financial regulation framework and land ownership framework and all the rest of it, which
Mm,
my sort of unproven theory is that the monarchy helps defend all that and
yeah,
therefore serves
totally.
the interests of that whole 1%,
Yeah,
rich layer of society. And by getting rid of the monarchy, we expose that.
yeah,
And rather than calling him, the Duke of Westminster and all that kind of nonsense, call him by his name and say he's a billionaire landowner
yeah,
and a landlord, and call him out for that. But they dress it up and talk about it as if he's got some kind of noble right to behave in that way, which is justified because of the link to the monarchy.
yeah, totally. And they couldn't exist without the monarchy, I don't think, because it wouldn't make any sense.
Mm.
They exist hidden because the monarchy is so visible.
Yeah.
And the aristocracy serve the monarchy in various ideological or literal material ways, and that's how they help that system. There's this return
Yeah.
that is very difficult to prove, but is there. You can see it, even in the fact that they're all each other's godparents, right? There's these kind of reciprocal relationships going on, I think.
It's interesting that the old aristocracy is more hidden than it used to be, and I think
Yeah.
I think they realised that the 20th century was a period, particularly the first half of the 20th century, where there was a lot of push against these sorts of things, and things like inheritance tax came in. A lot
Mm.
of them found the big estates and big houses unaffordable, so they had to downgrade and all the rest of it. And it feels like they've sort of decided that a low profile is the route to survival.
Yeah.
All the focus is put on the royals, because it would have been at the last coronation 1953, and certainly the ones earlier than that, all the aristocrats would have come out in their droves.
Yeah.
And things like the debutante balls and things like that all were happening. So yeah, it's a very odd thing that they're still there, but they have sort of gone to ground, if you were. If you like.
Well, and they've really changed their operations. So all of these country houses have opened up as, I don't know, zoos, or they've put a maze in the garden and opened it up to the public, or they've put organic cafes, or you can see these diverse, trying to
Yeah.
diversify their business models, which I just find that's what I want to do. I
I
find
think
it
you're doing some
fascinating.
work on this, right? Is that something you've been
I'd
looking
like to.
at?
I'm trying to get academia is very political and I can't get any funding. But I'd love to work on that. I think this, and I think that also has interesting resonances with the monarchy in through that kind of, how they've kind of diversified and changed over time. There are connections, I think, that I haven't quite got there yet, but there's
Yeah.
something interesting going on there, I think.
I was going to pick up just before we move on to some of the questions. This fascinating notion, which I know you quote Olivia Colman, which always saddens me because I think she's brilliant.
Me too.
Very
Yes.
smart, but she made this bizarre comment about the Queen, the late Queen, being a sort of a champion of feminism, and I've heard this from other people as well. And it's, to me, it just strikes me as clearly nonsense. And I think you probably have a similar view. And I think you said it's this claim is reductive. I mean, what do you mean by that? What is the relationship between things like equality for women, particularly, and the monarchy?
Yeah, so I mean, it draws on, and I teach gender studies as well, so this is this is kind of where I'm coming from. But you know, a very kind of liberal version of feminism that's kind of around empowerment. So, you know, you might see it with female CEOs. Sheryl Sandberg, for example, does a lot around smashing the glass ceiling. And of course, she's only smashing the glass ceiling for a very particular type of woman, i.e., middle class, white, so on and so forth. And I think that's sadly, because I also love Olivia Colman, but it's very similar, right? You know, if that's feminism, what is that saying? You know, is that who is that empowering for? And yeah, what you know, what is that doing? What exactly is that doing for the cause, other than having a powerful woman in charge? I'm
It was,
not.
I mean, some of the early comments about Meghan Markle marrying into it is like, you know, they talk
Yeah,
about modernizing
yeah,
because, you know, because Meghan Markle was marrying into this family. It's like, well, that's you're associating some kind of achievement by the fact that she's married to, you know, the man she's married to, which seems the antithesis of feminism.
yeah,
So,
totally. Yeah.
yeah, and it is very odd. But I do wonder whether the Olivia Colman thing, and this is maybe wishful thinking on my part because I want to think well of her, but I just, she was obviously in the Crown, and I mean, a lot of these actors were comment, they felt compelled to comment on the people that they were playing
Mm.
in the Crown, and I think that they probably felt compelled to say something nice about them,
Yeah.
and particularly Olivia Colman, because saying something nasty about them is tricky. And of course, Hilary Mantel found this when she made what was a sympathetic comment about Kate some time ago now, and it just got a whole heap of sort of tabloid attacks on her. But I think he called her a mannequin or something but she was sympathising with her position, not attacking her for being that.
Yeah. But it's very quotable, wasn't it? And it got completely quoted out of context, I think,
Yeah.
didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I suspect that, you know, women in women's celebrities probably find that they get attacked a lot more than male celebrities.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Ian McKellen, not that long ago, like 6 months ago, commented the fact that he found the Queen quite rude when he met her, and you know,
Right, I didn't see that.
he sort of commented, but it certainly didn't cause the huge splash that they did with Hilary Mantel.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. I just want very quickly, I guess, go back to the title of your book. What is it for? And I think, well, you want to tell us what you're on?
So, so it's I will say it's part of a series from Bristol University Press, and they have various titles, which I would also really recommend. They have like "What is veganism for? What is charity for?" Like it's really interesting series, and that's what drew me to it. But I'd sent a draft off to the publisher, and they'd said, you know, what's your answer to the question? And they said it feels like your answer is nothing good. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to write that. Because that's where it got to. I thought it was a really interesting question because, of course, we all know what the monarchy is. Like everybody could tell you something about the monarchy, and recognize a royal and know what the palace is and blah blah. But very few people know what it's for. And I thought that question, asking that question about the monarchy, was really interesting.
I did a debate a long time ago when someone this sort of question was, you know, the fundamental question of why it's there, what it's for, and the monarchist said, well, you know, it's only there for one thing, which is to give us a head of state. I just said, well, that's what it's there for. Is this really a sensible way of doing it? I mean, if you're going to reduce it to that, you know, we can do that cheaper, democratically. You know, so I think that I think they would struggle to answer that in a way that is really serious. I mean, and I did like your line towards the end saying the only way the monarchy could truly be better is if it ceases to exist.
Yeah.
Is
I just went for it. In my first book, my first book wasn't measured, right? It was very clear my position, but because it
Yeah.
was academic, you kind of have to be a bit more careful how you phrase it. And this one,
Yeah.
I was just like, I'm just gonna write.
Yeah.
I think.
But you won't be surprised. That's my view as well. So probably the view of a lot of people that are on the uh, watching this at the moment, and we've started getting some questions. I just for people watching, I will just remind you again. As I said, this is produced by Republic. Republic.org.uk is the website, and again, this is the 6th of May and 10th of May is Republic Day. So come along to Trafalgar Square or to Calton Hill in Edinburgh or Cardiff Castle, where there's going to be stuff going on, speeches, music, entertainment, and so on. And this is Laura's book, What is the Monarchy For? With a very good, concise answer to the question. And we are selling this republic.org.uk/shop, along with a whole ton of merchandise and other books, including mine, of course, and a few others, including this one, which is very good, from Norman Bacon. But yeah, this is already selling well from our shop, so do go and grab it. It's really interesting. And don't forget that in June, on June 14th, which is a Saturday, we've got Troop in the Colour protest, which is their iconic moment where they come out on the balcony and wave. We did it for the first time last year. The monarchists there started booing us, and on the TV it sounded like they were booing the royals. So the more we can get people booing us, then the better. So it's definitely, I want to get that Ceausescu moment at the Troop in the Colour. I don't really know Nicolae Ceausescu, the Romanian leader, who at the end of his time when the communist governments were collapsing, he went out on the balcony and he was waving to the crowd, and he suddenly realized they were all booing him, and the look on his face was one of panic, and he was gone within a day. So I don't know whether we'll get them gone within the day, but yeah, that's kind of the hope. Anyway, let's get on to some questions, because there's a few coming in, and obviously still use the Q&A function to ask some. There's Bridget Hall asking about the bias and the BBC, and yeah, just sort of asking, I guess, just it's a fairly general comment really about how how their coverage could be considered fair and biased, and I suppose there's a question about how we deal with it as well.
Yeah, and I suppose that's so. Another research project I did was interviews with royal correspondents, and that was really interesting, in terms of the systems of media and systems of monarchy and how they work together. And the royal correspondents basically said they were terrified of saying anything out of turn because they knew they wouldn't ever get access again. So this system of power, I think, and the BBC must feel that as well as an institution of state. That I think is a huge topic that isn't looked at. And there's my interviews are the first academic study about it. I think it's not talked about enough,
Yeah,
because of course that's what most people are seeing.
and I do think, I mean, this is something which we're quite keen to do, is engage with some academics and journalists and so on, and maybe get into that a little bit more, and maybe get some data and research and so on.
Yeah.
Because I've spoken to a lot of royal correspondents, and I mean, there was one that told me that there were, what they said is that the two BBC royal correspondents at the time were actually, when they were inside a private press conference, they were the ones who asked the hardest questions, but when they were outside the palace, they were the ones that soft pedaled it the most. It's a very odd relationship, and I think that threat of losing access is scandalous, really, because when
Unbelievable.
they get pushback. But
Yeah. And what other institution would get away with that? And they said around access, they said if I wanted to ask something about the Prime Minister, I could I've got a million civil servants to go and speak to. But who do I go and speak to about the royals? Because they all signed such tight non-disclosures. So there's something around that. Yeah, I think that kind of work I think is really important.
And I mean, I had coffee years ago with, I won't say which one it was, but one of the BBC royal correspondents, and I said, well, if there's a big scandal, why don't you ask one of the royals to come on the TV, onto Newsnight, and get grilled by Paxman, or onto Today program? And they said, well, we all know that they don't do interviews. It's like, well, that's not good enough. If that was a government minister, you would say that you've asked them on, and that they didn't want to come on. And if you say that often enough, people will go, why don't they want to come on? Um,
Yeah, and it's interesting because I asked them about their stories, like how they got into royal correspondent, and so many of them just kind of stumbled into it from another
yes.
area of journalism, and they have all these journalistic values, and they were telling me that this is wrong and blah blah blah, but they're boxed in. Like, what can they do? Because if
Yeah.
they can't get access, what are they going to publish? Are they going to lose the job? So
Mm.
that it's not that they're kind of at, or well. That's not true of all of them, I'm sure, and it wasn't for one I spoke to, but some of them, right, are trying to do this work and just can't do it. Which is, when we've got journalism code of conduct, that's really difficult.
Yeah, yeah. Raj Luthra was asking whether we go on other media news channels. And absolutely. I mean, all of them really. We have done CNN as well. Well, the CNN royal correspondent seems a little bit enamored with the royals for some reason. Um, the Sharon Green asking about the royals being said to be the ultimate public diplomats. So there's a bit of a long question here, but
I'll try
um,
and
how do we break that link between the royals and the diplomatic community? Is something coming from someone who says they are in that diplomatic community. I mean, I guess they are used, particularly in the Middle East and with
yeah.
questionable governments. Um, is that something you've looked at much? And I mean, I guess it comes back to soft power to some extent.
Yeah, and I think there was like when we went through Brexit, it felt like they were going to really start doing it more. I felt there was kind of language creeping in. There was discussion of the royal yacht, wasn't there, coming back and all of that. That it felt like it was part of that. And then I feel like that's kind of disappeared a little bit, which is quite interesting. There was talk of the Commonwealth playing a bigger role in that once Brexit happened, and that doesn't. I've not kept up with it as much, but that doesn't feel like it's quite panned out. So,
No,
I wonder what there must have been something political that went on there.
I mean,
Why is that?
yeah, the 2022 when they went around the Commonwealth in the Caribbean, it was absolute disaster. Um,
Yeah, I
and
wonder if that was it. Yeah, 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 that's true.
I think that probably put it down. I mean, he's gone to Australia, he's going to Canada, which are relatively safe.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it's going to be a long time before they go to the Caribbean again. Because,
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that did a lot of damage, didn't it? Yeah.
but there's a very good book. Well, I've got it right here, but it's called We Do Sell It. So you can check it out on our shop. But it's by Philip Murphy, called The Empire's New
Mm.
Clothes. Really
Right.
interesting sort of
Mm.
dissection of what the Commonwealth really is. And it's really an empty vessel full of empty promises. Um, and I think that there's a lot of truth there. And I think there's sort of Emperor's New Clothes element to their role in diplomacy as well. People think that that's what they ought to do and
Yeah.
somehow useful. But I mean, Andrew was criticised um, even before the Epstein thing came out of being actively a hindrance to our diplomatic missions overseas.
Yeah,
Uh,
and stuff's come out with him recently as well about odd relationships at that time, hasn't it, with that Chinese businessman or whatever it was that came out
well,
the other.
indeed, yeah. So I think a lot of it is sort of trying to get into the detail of it and expose it and challenge it. And there is another person called Alexandra Hall. That's HALL and then HALL again, who is a former diplomat and former um, ambassador, and she's spoken out quite a lot against the the state of British politics and has become Republican and all the rest of it, having come from a very conservative background and establishment background, and she's
Interesting.
worth
Mm.
listening to about that. Um, it's going to Raj Luther, just very quickly, you're asking about bringing flags and things to Republic Day. Please
Yeah.
do. Doesn't matter what color they are, anything you like. But there's going to be a load of speeches and music and so on going on from midday to 3 o'clock. So do come along to that. And Stephen Cook. I'm assuming that's the Stephen Cook I know. Wrote about the concept of giving whilst taking. He says that your first book informed his master's. So there you go.
Thank you. That's very nice.
And how do you think people will become aware of just how much they take and how little they actually give back, despite the sort of sycophantic hype? And I think this is what the comment you made about no matter what they do for charity, it will never pay back what they take.
Mm. I mean, I don't know apart from educating people about what they cost, but it's so difficult to do that, as you know, because it's so difficult to actually give an answer.
Mm.
And when you kind of give these estimations, but I think people just give you another estimation back.
Yep.
So I think it's a really difficult. It can be quite a powerful topic, depending on how you phrase it, but it can equally, I think, maybe trip us up a little bit. So I don't know, or exposing the charity as is useful to them. So exposing kind of the meaning of the charity as opposed to just thinking about it as giving. Maybe we try and
Yeah.
reframe that slightly. Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, there was a very, very interesting report study done in 2020 by a group called Giving Evidence that showed the impact of royal patronage on
Yes, that was a good report. Yeah.
close to zero.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. And it surprised me how little impact it had.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the figure that we've put on it now is £500 million, well, more than £500 million now, and it's gone up by 45 million at the start of April. That landed quite well in the media. I think it's having that £500 million is quite a powerful figure, but still people go, oh well, it brings in X amount from this and X amount from that, and that. So people will always try and find a way of justifying it.
Yeah.
Well, they don't
Yeah.
seem to stop and think about it. It's like, well, okay, if they cost us £500 million and they bring in 1 billion, okay, fine. But what if they cost us nothing and brought in 1 billion? I mean,
Yeah.
we'd be £500 million richer.
And I
So
think that a really powerful argument is that what is the one that Republic makes around, well, it's not, not having a sitting monarch isn't costing France any tourists. And I think that's a really interesting because there's this assumption, but we don't know whether he's sat in the palace when we go and look at it, do we? What does it matter? And I think that's a really nice argument.
And the one I often point is close to home is Tower of London, which gets far more tourists than Buckingham
Yeah.
Palace, and they haven't
Yeah.
lived there for a very long time. So,
Yeah.
yeah, Jonathan Fogel was asking about the honour system. I don't know whether you've touched on this. I guess this also comes back to soft power in a way, but also, to my mind, is sort of central to state corruption. Have you looked at the that relationship between the honour system and the monarchy?
Only very brief, and actually, what I nearly mentioned it actually when we were talking about something earlier. I agree with you, Jonathan. And I think that creation of networks is really powerful. It does a lot to reproduce kind of colonialist thought, as we know, because of the name of it. But also, I think that the way the monarchy is seen to give legitimacy, and the way that, again, that's the way that's narrated in the press every year as kind of a celebration, I think is really powerful. So yeah, I totally agree. I think abolishing that is. I wanted to connect it to aristocracy. That's when I wanted to mention it before, as part of that kind of same system of peerages and so
And
on.
I think that as a topic, I mean, as a topic in itself, it needs a lot more research and coverage because it really feels like quite a pernicious system of patronage. Patronage is the real problem anyway, but it's the way they cover it up by as you say, associating it with the monarchy and say, oh well, because obviously we know that the king doesn't award these things. Now they're awarded by the prime minister and the opposition leader, and the other way is obviously handing them out to, the lollipop ladies and the charity workers, and who always get the lowest award. That then becomes the headline, so that they can on the side just give all the knighthoods to their friends and their donors and all the lifelong civil servants. So it's pretty pernicious.
And there's that one, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of it, but there's that one where there's like 12 members.
The Garter.
Yeah, like that is astonishing that still exists in 2025. In terms of a system of privilege and establishment power, like that's incredible.
It's just very weird. I think that there's a room for a whole sort of maybe a podcast series of just making fun of people that take honours. I find them completely ridiculous,
I'd
and
be up for that.
I don't take people particularly seriously who take them, and I just find them quite absurd. And when I say that, I'm not talking about your charity worker that takes an MBE, and I get that to some extent, but I think it's the people that take the knighthoods, who do the Garter ceremony and want to be a lord. And part of it is just, I mean, Norman Baker in his book, what do you do? Because he took a position in the Privy Council, and he said one of the reasons he took it is because he knew, when he was a minister in the coalition at the time, and he said he knew that it would really annoy a lot of the Tory colleagues that desperately wanted to be in the Privy Council. So and I think that the fact that desperation to have these little gongs and medals and things is very silly. Peter Harding is asking an interesting question here. What duties, I don't know if you can answer this, but what duties does the king currently perform which could not equally be done by an elected head of state?
Well, I think you'd be better at answering that, Graham, than me. But I mean, I think in terms of democracy and those kind of systems of politics, nothing. And actually, yeah, an elected head of state could do a lot more. I think obviously there's differences with, the kind of the philanthropy and that kind of side of it would, I think, necessarily be less, but I think that's a good thing. Because as we know, that's not doing an awful lot for the system anyway.
Yeah.
But in terms of the actual functioning of the state, I think head of state would be a lot, be able to do a lot more, probably.
Well, this is my thought: is that
Yeah.
the elected head of state could actually do the job properly.
Yeah.
They can do it independently. I mean, what they wouldn't be able to do is take 3 million euros in cash from a Qatari businessman and get away. So, but because they, I talk about the experience, this notion of the Queen, the late Queen, having years of experience, and that this was somehow beneficial to her prime ministers. That clearly it wasn't beneficial to Churchill because she was like 25 and he'd already done a whole stint as prime minister during the war. And the idea that he would somehow benefit from her experience is nonsense. And what he would benefit from is the experience and insight of someone serious and professional who's been elected to that post. The flip side for them is that they would have someone who can act independently, which is what they don't want. So yeah, it is interesting, and I think this is the point: is that because monarchists sometimes say, they're there to act as an independent head of state, to check and balance and all the rest of it. And I say, well, that's what a head of state is in a republic, but the difference is that they actually can do it because they're independent of the prime minister, rather than just doing it the way the prime minister. The current system is basically we've made the captain of one of the two teams the referee by handing over the monarch's powers to.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. This is interesting. John Cartledge, which I think you asked a while ago, and I popped up in front of me again, saying that some of the most cogent criticisms of organisations often come from within, and whether or not there's any opposition to the hereditary system amongst members of the extended family. Obviously, Harry comes to mind, but I don't think he's actually gone as far as saying that I think he's actually said that he still supports the monarchy. But I mean, I suppose there are people much further down the line. And are you aware of anybody that sort of
No, but I agree with you, John, because I actually think Harry's stuff did a hell of a lot of damage, even if, he says he supports the monarchy and he's very explicit about that. I think his speaking out, and Meghan as well, to a certain extent, that was one of the most powerful things I think that could have happened. Because it's obviously so rare to hear, again, non-disclosure agreements. It's obviously so rare to hear from anyone inside. I think that had much more resonance, and it kind of taps, people. I said earlier, what people are interested in are those personal stories, not about the institution. And what he did was criticized. He was criticizing the individuals wasn't he, within the institution, but the implication of that was this system, this kind of institutional system of sexism and racism. So I agree. I think if more people did that, but no, I can't think of any examples really.
I guess there is a lot of pressure to not come out and
totally,
side, as it were, and including financial loss potentially if you get cut out of the inheritance and so on and so forth. But and I suppose a lot of them do just benefit from it, so maybe they don't reflect that much on the how awful it is for everybody else. But there was one that the former king of Bulgaria, he was obviously a child king, I guess, in the 1950s, I think, was booted out by the Bulgarian communists and went back to Bulgaria when the communists left. And some Bulgarians asked if he wanted to come back as king, and he said, well, I think that's all a bit outdated now. And instead he stood for election and served.
That's interesting.
Served the term as prime minister and president. So, yeah, Dale Moore just has just pointed out, apparently your book is still showing as pre-order on the shop, but it is being processed, so you can buy it, and we will get it out to you, and I'll fix that. So we'll sort it out, but it is already out. So, but we will get that to you. Actually, so it's asking about Republic Day events in other towns and cities. I mean, it very much depends on other people getting organised. So the Edinburgh one and Cardiff one is being organised by local volunteers. So that's really important. And of course, we're relying on a lot of volunteers in London as well. So hopefully, yeah, it will grow as time goes on. So, but the big focus is on the three capitals at the moment. And yes, we will have our allies represented there in some way, shape, or form. So we've got Floris Müller coming over from the Netherlands, the Dutch campaign. We've got Labour for Republic. We've got some people from Australia there, and also speaking on the screen as well. So we're trying to show it as an event that brings together Republicans. Quite a general question, I suppose, here about well, sort of asking why should we be a republic, which is I think we've sort of covered for the last half hour or so. But I think, I mean, how do you think? I mean, do you have any thoughts about not so much how do we persuade people, but how do we actually go about it? Is there a particular way that you think it should be done, or a particular preference on what it might look like after we've got rid of the monarchy?
Well, I haven't researched this, so I cited Republic's suggestion, which I think is very sensible. In terms of how, I think that other countries transferring to a republic will be quite powerful. I think particularly if Canada and Australia go, I know that's maybe not looking quite so likely at the moment, but I think that that'll be quite powerful. So I think there's this. I think it's going to be a slow toppling of dominoes that needs to happen. That'll get more and more people on side, and of course, as more time passes, and we'll eventually get the next king in. I think that'll be another kind of moment. So I think it's going to be it's toppling all of these different things slowly, I think, and different things will take on different resonances.
I do think, I mean, Canada, the support in Canada has collapsed. It's
Mm.
way below, it's gone down to around 30%, which is really, I mean, 15 years ago, I would have said it would be the last one to go. But I mean, now I think the Trump thing is going to have an interesting effect because people have been quite upset with the fact that their head of state has said nothing about the fact that their neighbor is threatening to invade them and take them over as the 51st state.
Mm.
Now they've now said that he's going to go over there and open the Canadian Parliament. But the British government is going to have a say in what he can say in the Canadian Parliament because they don't want him saying anything anti-Trump or echoing the sentiments of Mark Carney. So, you know, it's going to be quite interesting to see whether people are particularly impressed with what he has to say and whether that affects them on the Canadian government. So that's interesting. Our essential strategy is to make a lot of noise to get the public opinion on side and to use that leverage of the public opinion to then pressure the politicians, but it has to be public led. I think this is the evidence that comes from places like Australia where they tried it 35 years ago and failed. But again, it's not enough. You need the pressure as well as the public sentiment behind it. But there's an academic called Matt Waltrip. I don't know whether you pronounce that right, but he said to me quite a long time ago, and I asked about this, how we get rid of it. He said, no, you don't necessarily need a referendum, but you should have one. And he said he thinks that a very democratic thing should be done in a very democratic way, which I think is a very good sentiment.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
So it's a good sentiment to end on. And I just want to say thank you very much for coming along. It's been really interesting, and I hope everyone's found it as interesting as I have. And yeah, do read the book. It is available on the shop, so I'll make sure it's not saying pre-order anymore, but you will get it if you order it. And just to also say, don't forget to subscribe for the public's emails, subscribe to our YouTube channel, so this and other episodes, previous episodes of this and future ones will all be on there as well as our new podcast, which is filmed as well as audio. And again, don't forget Republic Day on the weekend, Trooping the Colour in June. And yeah, Beyond the Royal Headlines is back at 7 o'clock next month, which will be June the 3rd. And I'm hoping to be talking to one, possibly two of our Dutch colleagues, one of whom you'll see, Floris Müller, on Saturday if you're in Trafalgar Square. So again, huge thank you, Laura. Really,
Thank you.
really
Really
interesting,
fun.
fun. And yeah, thanks again. And we'll see you all later. Bye.